Hi, I'm Elena. Today's story will keep you on the edge of your seat. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss an update. The antiseptic smell of the hospital usually calmed me. For 15 years, it had been the sense of my purpose, my competence, and my dominance. I was Dr. Elena Rostova, the chief of cardiothoracic surgery at St. Jude's Memorial, a hospital my grandfather helped build and my father expanded. I owned the majority shares. I held the scalpel that saved senators, CEOs, and innocent children. I was steady. I was unshakable. But that morning, the smell made me want to vomit. I was gripping the steering wheel of my Mercedes so hard my knuckles had turned a translucent white. The city blurred past me in streaks of gray and rain, but I didn't see the traffic lights or the pedestrians. All I could see was the image my mind had conjured from the terrifying phone call I had received 10 minutes ago. Dr. Rostova, you need to get to the main OR immediately. It's Mark. There's been a catastrophic accident. Mark, my husband, the man who had made me coffee this morning, the man who had kissed my forehead, albeit distantly, before heading out for his morning run. We had been married for 12 years. 12 years of building a life, a reputation, and a fortune together. Lately, things had been strained. He was distant, often checking his phone, staying late at the firm where he worked as a corporate attorney. I had brushed it off as stress. I told myself that marriages have seasons, and this was just a cold winter that would eventually thaw. I never imagined the winter would turn into a funeral. Please, please let him be okay, I whispered to the empty car, my voice cracking. Tears blurred my vision, hot and stinging. I wiped them away furiously. I couldn't be blind now. I had to drive. I had to get to him. The call had come from the emergency dispatch line directly to my private cell, bypassing the usual hospital protocols. They said he was being prepped for emergency surgery. They said the trauma was severe. Blunt force trauma to the chest. Internal bleeding. My mind, usually a neatly organized archive of medical procedures and diagnosis, was now a chaotic storm. I was diagnosing injuries I hadn't even seen yet. Ruptured aorta, cardiac tamponade, flail chest. I needed to be there. I wasn't just his wife. I was the best surgeon in the state. If anyone could save him, it was me. I wouldn't let any of the residents touch him. I wouldn't let Dr. Holloway, my ambitious and slippery deputy, near him. I screeched into the hospital parking lot, bypassing the staff gate and leaving my car haphazardly in the ambulance bay. I didn't care about the ticket. I didn't care about the angry shout of the valet. I threw the door open and sprinted toward the trauma entrance. The rain soaked my blouse instantly, plastering the silk against my skin, but I was numb to the cold. The automatic door slid open with a hiss, and the chaos of the ER hit me. A wall of noise, beeping monitors, shouting nurses, and the underlying hum of panic. Usually, I walked through these halls with a slow, commanding stride. People moved out of my way out of respect. Today, I was just a terrified woman running for her life. "Where is he?" I screamed, spotting the head nurse at the trauma desk. "Where is Mark Rostova?" Nurse Jenkins looked up, her face pale. She seemed startled to see me, her eyes darting nervously to the left. "Dr. Rostova, we didn't expect you this fast." "Where is he?" I slammed my hand on the desk, ignoring the curious stares of the patients in the waiting area. "Is he in Bay 1? Has he been moved upstairs?" "They took him straight to OR 3, Jenkins stammered, looking down at her clipboard as if the answers were written there in invisible ink. "Dr. Vance authorized the bypass." "Vance?" My blood ran cold. Dr. Gregory Vance was the hospital director. He was an administrator, a bureaucrat who hadn't held a scalpel in 10 years. He and I had been locked in a silent war for control of the board for the last 6 months. He wanted to sell the hospital to a private equity firm that would strip it for parts. I wanted to keep it independent. Why was Vance involved in a trauma case? And why OR3? That was the isolated operating theater in the old wing, usually reserved for highly infectious cases or VIPs requiring absolute secrecy. Why OR3? I demanded, but I didn't wait for an answer. I turned and ran toward the elevators. The numbers above the doors seemed to tick up with agonizing slowness. Ding! I threw myself inside and jammed the button for the 4th floor. The ride-up was a torture chamber of silence. I could hear my own heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that echoed the dread pulling in my stomach. I checked my reflection in the polished steel doors. My hair was wet and tangled, my eyes wild, my chest heaving. I looked unstable. I looked broken. Focus, Elena, I told myself. You need to be a surgeon now, not a wife. Assess, repair, save. The elevator doors opened onto the surgical floor. Usually, this corridor was bustling with scrub nurses, residents, and anesthesiologists. But today, the hallway leading to OR3 was eerily quiet. The light seemed dimmer here, flickering slightly with the hum of the old generator. I broke into a run again, my heels clicking loudly on the linoleum. "Mark," I called out, my voice echoing in the emptiness. I was 20 feet from the double doors of the operating room. I could see the red surgery in progress light wasn't on yet. That meant I wasn't too late. I could still scrub in. I could still take control. I reached for the handle of the scrubbing room door, just adjacent to the main theater. Suddenly, a hand shot out from the janitorial supply closet to my right. It was a grip of steel, surprisingly strong, clamping over my wrist. Before I could scream, I was yanked sideways. The momentum threw me off balance and I stumbled into the darkness of the closet. The door clicked shut behind me, plunging me into a scent of bleach and stale mops. "Let me go," I gasped, raising my hand to strike whoever had grabbed me. "Shh, Dr. Rostova, stop, please." The voice was a desperate whisper. My eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering in from the gap under the door. It was faint, but I recognized the terrified face dimming back at me. It was Sarah. She was a scrub nurse I had mentored years ago, a quiet, diligent woman who had recently been transferred to the administrative wing against her will. She was trembling, her eyes wide with the fear that seemed far too large for this small room. "Sarah, what the hell are you doing?" I hissed, trying to pull my arm free. "My husband is in that operating room. I have to—" "He's not hurt," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. She pressed a finger to her lips, tears welling in her eyes. "Dr. Rostova, you have to listen to me. Mark isn't hurt. It's a trap." I froze. The words didn't make sense. They floated in the air like dust motes, refusing to land. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. "I got the call. They said blunt force trauma. They said—" "It's a lie," Sarah insisted, gripping my shoulders now. "I was in the scheduling office. I heard them. Dr. Vance, Dr. Holloway, and your husband. They're all in there. They staged the call. They know you'd run the red lights. They know you'd come in frantic." "Why?" I breathed. The adrenaline was still pumping through me, but now it was changing flavor, from panic to a cold, sickening dread. "Why would they do that?" "They have a psychiatric hold team waiting in the scrub room," Sarah said. "They're going to claim you had a psychotic break, that you burst into a sterile field while hallucinating that your husband was dying. They have papers drawn up, Elena. They want to declare you mentally unfit to practice. They want your license, and they want your shares." I stared at her. It was insane. It was a plot from a bad movie. And yet, the pieces slotted together with a terrifying click. The distance Mark had shown lately, the way Vance had been smiling in the board meetings, like he held a winning hand I couldn't see, the isolated operating room. "I don't believe you," I said automatically. It was a defense mechanism. My brain refused to accept that the man I slept next to, the man I had planned a vacation with just yesterday, could be capable of such monstrous betrayal. "Look," Sarah said,
She pointed to a ventilation grate high up on the wall of the closet. It shared a wall with the observation gallery of OR3. Climb up on the shelving, look through the grate, but do not make a sound. If they know you're here and you're not playing your part, I don't know what they'll do. I looked at the grate. Then I looked at Sarah. She wasn't lying. I had been a doctor long enough to read pain and truth in people's eyes. She was risking her job, maybe her life, to warn me. "Okay," I whispered. I kicked off my heels. I stepped onto a bucket of industrial cleaner, then hoisted myself up onto the metal shelving unit that held stacks of paper towels and saline solution. The metal groaned softly under my weight, and we both froze, holding our breath. Silence from the hallway. I pulled myself higher until my face was level with the grate. Through the slats, I had a clear view of the operating theater below. The room was fully lit. The heart-lung machine was on standby, humming rhythmically. A patient lay on the table, draped in blue sterile sheets. But the patient wasn't unconscious. He was sitting up, swinging his legs over the side of the table. It was Mark. He looked perfectly healthy. He was wearing a hospital gown, but he hadn't bothered to tie the bag. He was holding a glass of amber liquid, whiskey, and he was laughing. My stomach dropped so violently I almost fell off the shelf. Standing next to him was Dr. Gregory Vance, the director, and leaning against the instrument tray, twirling a scalpel with casual disregard for safety, was Dr. Jessica Holloway, my deputy, the woman I had trained, the woman who had sent me a birthday card last week calling me her inspiration. I pressed my face closer to the grate, straining to hear through the ventilation system. The sound was tinny but clear enough. "She should be here any minute," Vance was saying, checking his heavy gold watch. "Security reported her car entering the lot 3 minutes ago. She abandoned it in the ambulance bay. Predictable." "She was always dramatic," Mark said. Hearing his voice, that familiar deep baritone that used to whisper, "I love you" in the dark, felt like a physical blow. He took a sip of the whiskey. "God, I hate these gowns. How long do I have to play the victim?" "Just until she burst through those doors," Jessica purred. She walked over to Mark and adjusted his collar, her hand lingering on his chest. It wasn't a romantic touch. It was proprietary. It was the touch of a co-conspirator. Once she comes in screaming, claiming you're dying when you're clearly fine, the witnesses will have everything they need. Dr. Rostova, hallucinating, erratic, dangerous. "And the psychiatric team?" Mark asked.
Waiting in the induction room, Vance confirmed with a sneer. "Dr. Aris has the commitment papers ready. Emergency 72-hour hold for evaluation. That gives us 3 days to convene the emergency board meeting. With Elena incapacitated and mentally unstable, her voting rights on the board are suspended. We vote to sell to the equity firm on Friday morning." "And the payout?" Mark asked, his voice sharp, transactional. $50 million for your share of the spousal assets once the divorce goes through, on the grounds of her insanity," Vance said, "plus a seat on the new board." Mark smiled. It was a cruel, wolfish smile I had never seen before. "To freedom," he said, raising his glass. "To the end of the Ice Queen," Jessica added, clinking her scalpel against his glass. I felt the bile rise in my throat. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle the sob that threatened to tear its way out of me. My entire life was a lie. The late nights, the distance, it wasn't stress, it was planning. He had been planning this for months. He had been sleeping in my bed, eating my food, letting me comfort him, all while plotting to strip me of my dignity, my career, and my sanity. And Jessica, I had defended her when the board wanted to fire her for negligence last year. I had saved her career.
The betrayal was so absolute, so encompassing, that for a moment I went blank. I stopped feeling sad. I stopped feeling scared. I watched Mark laugh again, throwing his head back. He looked so confident, so sure that he had won. He thought I was the frantic, emotional wife who would come charging in to save him. He thought I was weak. He thought wrong. I looked down at Sarah, who was watching me with anxious eyes. I climbed down from the shelf slowly, my movements deliberate and silent. I wasn't shaking anymore. "What did you see?" Sarah whispered. I stood up straight, smoothing down my rain-soaked blouse. I wiped the smudged mascara from under my eyes. When I looked at Sarah, she flinched. She later told me that in that moment, my eyes didn't look human. They looked like surgical steel. "I saw enough," I said, my voice eerily calm. "We have to get you out of here," Sarah said. "If they find you—" "No," I said. "If I leave, they'll just try again. They'll invent something else. They'll say I abandoned my dying husband. They have the narrative controlled from every angle." "So what do you do?" Sarah asked, panic rising in her voice. "You can't go in there. They'll lock you up." "They want a show," I murmured, my mind racing, calculating, dissecting the situation just as I would a complex tumor. They want a hysterical woman. They want Dr. Elena Rostova, the broken wife. I looked at the door of the closet. Beyond it lay the corridor. If I walked away, I looked guilty. If I walked in screaming, I played into their hands. I needed a third option. I looked at Sarah. "Do you still have your access card for the AV control room?" Sarah blinked. "Yes, it's just down the hall. Why?" "And does the internal broadcast system still override the screens in the boardroom and the main lobby?" "Yes, for emergency announcements," Sarah said, confusion knitting her brow. "Elena, what are you thinking?" A cold, dark plan began to form in my mind. It was reckless. It was dangerous. But it was the only weapon I had left. They wanted to destroy my reputation. They wanted to use the truth against me. I looked at Sarah. "Give me your phone." "What?" "Give me your phone now." Sarah handed it over, her hands shaking. I opened the camera app. "I'm not going to run, Sarah," I whispered, staring at the closed door of the supply closet. "I'm not going to hide. I'm going to give them exactly what they want, an audience. But they aren't going to like the ending." I handed the phone back to her. "I need you to go to the AV control room. I need you to patch the feed from OR3 directly to the main screens in the hospital lobby and the boardroom. Can you do that?" "The cameras in OR3 are for teaching. They're usually off." "Vance turned them on," I said, a grim smile touching my lips. "I saw the red light on the wall console inside. He's probably recording it for his own insurance, or to replay my breakdown for the board. I need you to hijack that feed." Sarah hesitated, fear warring with loyalty. Then she nodded. "I can do it, but it will take me 5 minutes to bypass the firewall." 5 minutes, I repeated. "I can buy 5 minutes." "What are you going to do?" I reached for a spare lab coat hanging on a hook in the closet. It was too big and smelled of dust, but it covered my wet clothes. I buttoned it up to the chin. "I'm going to go to the scrub room," I said softly. "I'm going to wash my hands. I'm going to put on my mask. And then I'm going to go to work." Sarah slipped out of the closet first, checking the coast. She gave me a quick nod and sprinted toward the technical wing. I waited 10 seconds, then I stepped out into the corridor.
My heart was a sledgehammer against my ribs, but my face was a mask of stone. I walked toward the scrub room. I could see the shadow of the security guard, the psychiatric team, waiting just inside the induction room to the left. If I went through the main doors, they would grab me, but the scrub room had a direct glass door into the OR. I walked to the sink. I turned on the water. I picked up the scrubbing brush. The sound of the water was loud in the silence. Through the glass window above the sink, I could see them. Mark was pouring another drink. Jessica was laughing. Vance was checking his watch again, looking annoyed. "Where is she?" I heard Vance's muffled voice through the glass. "She should be here." I scrubbed my hands. 1 minute, 2 minutes. I watched my husband. I watched the man I had vowed to love and cherish. I watched him sell me out for money and power. I dried my hands. I put on a fresh surgical mask, hiding my expression. I put on a surgical cap. I took a deep breath. 3 minutes. I didn't enter the room yet. Instead, I reached into the pocket of the lab coat and pulled out a marker pen I had found in the closet. On the glass window that separated the scrub room from the operating theater, the window they were currently facing away from, I wrote a single word in reverse so they would read it correctly when they turned around. Smile. Then I tapped on the glass with the metal handle of a retractor. Clink, clink, clink. Inside the room, the laughter stopped. Mark turned around. Vance spun on his heel. Jessica dropped the scalpel. They saw me standing there, in the scrub room, perfectly calm, surgical mask on, hands raised in the sterile position, and floating in front of my face, written in black ink on the glass, smile. Mark's face went white. Vance looked confused. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't rush in. I just stood there, staring at them with dead eyes, waiting for Sarah to flip the switch that would broadcast this little party to the entire hospital. But then the door to the scrub room behind me opened. "Dr. Rostova," a deep voice boomed. I froze. I turned my head slightly. 2 large men in orderly uniforms were standing there. One held a syringe, the psychiatric team. They had found me before Sarah could flip the switch. "Please come with us quietly," the man said, stepping forward. I looked at the men. I looked back at Mark through the glass. He had seen the orderlies. A slow, relieved smirk was spreading across his face. He thought he was saved. He thought he had won. The orderly lunged for me. The needle was inches from my neck. The clear liquid inside the syringe shimmered under the fluorescent lights. A sedative strong enough to drop a horse, or in my case, strong enough to render me incoherent for the next 48 hours, long enough for them to sign the papers, long enough to steal my life. "Dr. Rostova," the orderly grunted, stepping into my personal space. Time seemed to dilate. In the operating room, a cardiac arrest feels like it lasts for hours, but in reality, it's seconds. You learn to live in those seconds. You learn to think while others panic. I didn't fight him physically. I couldn't overpower 2 men who were twice my size. Instead, I used the only weapon I had, the environment. I stepped back, my hip bumping against the instrument trolley next to the sink. "Stop," I said. My voice wasn't a scream. It was the cold, authoritative command I used when a resident was about to nick an artery. It was a tone that demanded obedience. The orderly hesitated for a fraction of a second, conditioned by the hierarchy of the hospital to pause when a senior doctor spoke. "If you inject me with that," I said, locking eyes with him, "you will be charged with assault and kidnapping. But if you take 1 step closer, you'll be slipping on surgical-grade disinfectant." Before he could process the threat, I kicked the pedal of the industrial soap dispenser. It didn't aim at him, it aimed at the floor between us. A slick pink puddle of high-viscosity soap splattered onto the tiles. "Grab her!" Vance shouted from inside the OR, his voice muffled through the glass. The orderly lunged. His heavy boot hit the soap. His feet went out from under him with almost comical speed.
He crashed down hard, his head cracking against the porcelain sink with a sickening thud. The syringe skidded across the floor, sliding under the cabinets. The second orderly froze, looking at his partner, then at me. I didn't wait. I turned and slammed my hip into the silver bar of the door leading into the operating room. I stumbled into the theater, the cool, conditioned air hitting my face. I was in. I was in the lion's den. Mark was still sitting on the operating table, his legs dangling. He looked annoyed rather than guilty. Jessica Halloway was standing by the instrument tray, looking like a child caught with her hand in the cookie jar, but her eyes were defiant. Dr. Vance was purple with rage. "You incompetent fools," Vance yelled at the remaining orderly in the scrub room. "Get in here and restrain her." "No one touches me," I screamed. The sound tore through the room, bouncing off the tiled walls and the expensive machinery. It was raw. It was primal. I ripped the surgical mask off my face and threw it on the floor. "Hello, Mark," I said. My breath was coming in ragged gasps, but I stood tall. I hear the recovery time for blunt force trauma is miraculous these days. Mark sighed. He actually sighed, as if I were interrupting his favorite TV show. He set his whiskey glass down on the sterile drape, a sacrilege that made my surgeon's eye twitch. "Elena," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "you're hysterical. Look at you. You're soaked, you're shaking, and you just assaulted a staff member. You're proving our point for us." "Is that the narrative?" I asked, taking a slow step forward. "That I'm crazy?" "It's not a narrative if it's true," Jessica chimed in. She crossed her arms, the scalpel she had been playing with now resting on the tray. "You've been cracking for months, Elena. Everyone sees it. The obsession with the board, the paranoia. Coming here today thinking your husband was dying when he was just undergoing a routine checkup?" "A routine checkup in a trauma bay?" I let out a dry, mirthless laugh. "With a bottle of whiskey? On a Sunday?" "Details," Vance spat. He walked around the table, positioning himself between me and the door. He was closing the trap. "The board won't care about the details. They'll care that the chief of surgery just had a psychotic break. The papers are already drafted, Elena. Sign the voluntary commitment forms and we can keep this quiet. Refuse and we do it the hard way." I looked at Mark, my husband, the man I had nursed through the flu, the man whose debts I had paid off when we first met. "Mark," I said softly, "look at me. Are you really doing this for money?" Mark hopped off the table. He smoothed his gown. He walked right up to me, close enough that I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath, the scotch I had bought him for our anniversary.
"It's not just the money, Elena," he whispered, his eyes cold and dead. "It's you. It's always been you. You're suffocating. You're so perfect, so successful. Dr. Rostova, the savior. Do you know what it's like to be married to a monument? I'm tired of living in your shadow. I want my own light, and $50 million buys a hell of a lot of light." The cruelty took my breath away. It wasn't a heat of the moment anger. It was a calculated, festering resentment that had been rotting him from the inside out for years. "And Jessica?" I asked, glancing at my deputy. "Jessica appreciates me." Mark smiled, a nasty, twisting thing. "And she understands that this hospital needs new leadership that isn't afraid to make a profit." "We're selling to Omnicorp on Friday," Vance declared, checking his watch again. "You won't be able to stop it. You'll be in a nice, soft room at the Pineview Institute." "I see," I said. I looked up at the wall. High in the corner, above the anesthesia cart, was the main surgical camera. It was a high-definition dome camera used for broadcasting surgeries to the lecture halls for students. Usually the little LED light on the base was off, but right then it flickered. It blinked red once, then twice. Then it turned a solid, unblinking crimson.
Sarah had done it. A rush of adrenaline, sharper and colder than before, flooded my veins. I wasn't just in a room with 3 conspirators anymore. I was on stage, and the entire hospital was the audience. I forced my posture to relax. I uncurled my fists. I needed to draw them out. I needed a confession so undeniable that no amount of lawyers could spin it. "So," I said, raising my voice slightly to ensure the microphone on the wall picked it up. "So let me get this straight. You faked a car accident. You lured me here. You have Dr. Vance and Dr. Holloway as accomplices. The goal is to declare me mentally incompetent so you can take my voting rights and sell St. Jude's Hospital to a private equity firm." "Don't summarize it like a legal brief, Elena. It's boring." Jessica rolled her eyes. "But yes, essentially." "And the $50 million?" I pressed. "That comes from my assets?" "Spousal support," Mark grinned. "I'm going to suffer greatly from the emotional distress of having a crazy wife. I deserve compensation." "And you, Dr. Vance? You're violating your Hippocratic oath, conspiring to frame a colleague, all for a kickback from Omnicorp?" "It's business, Elena. The hospital is failing. We need the buyout. You're the only dinosaur standing in the way because of your sentimental attachment to your father's legacy. I'm saving this place." "By destroying me?" "By removing an obstacle," Vance corrected. He signaled to the orderly who was still standing by the door. "Enough talking. Grab her. Injector. Let's get this over with." The orderly stepped forward. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just pointed to the wall. "Before you do that," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a laser, "you might want to wave." Vance frowned. "What?" "Wave," I repeated. "To the camera." I pointed directly at the red light in the corner. Vance spun around. Mark froze. Jessica looked up, her mouth falling open. "The surgical feed," I said, my voice ringing out with triumph. "It's not just recording. My associate in the AV room has patched it through to the internal broadcast system." Mark's face went the color of ash. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, stepping closer to him as he stepped back, "that right now, this conversation is playing on the 60-inch screen in the main lobby. It's playing in the staff break rooms. It's playing in the cafeteria. And, if I'm not mistaken, it's playing on the giant monitors in the executive boardroom on the 10th floor, where the board of directors is currently having their Sunday brunch meeting." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb that has landed but hasn't detonated yet. Vance scrambled for his phone. He pulled it out of his pocket. The screen was lit up with notifications, 5 missed calls, 10 texts, all from the board chairman.
"No," Vance whispered. "No, no, no." "You said I was paranoid," I said to Mark. "You said I was crazy. But the waiting room is full of patients, nurses, and doctors who just watched the grieving husband drink whiskey and brag about stealing $50 million. "Turn it off," Vance screamed at the camera, waving his arms like a maniac. "Turn it off." "They can't," I said, calm as a frozen lake. "I locked the system from the terminal in the supply closet before I came in. Only I have the password to cut the feed." This was a lie, of course. Sarah was doing it, but they didn't know that. Mark looked at me. The arrogance was gone. The smugness had evaporated. In its place was pure, unadulterated fear. He looked at the door. He looked at the window. He realized there was no way out. "Elena," he stammered. "Elena, baby, wait. It was a joke, a role play. We were testing the security protocols." "A joke?" I raised an eyebrow. "You just confessed to conspiracy and fraud on a live stream." Jessica suddenly dropped the scalpel she had picked up again. It clattered loudly on the floor. She backed away from Mark and Vance, holding her hands up. "I had nothing to do with this," she shrieked, looking at the camera. "They forced me. Vance threatened my job. I was trying to help her." "You literally called me the Ice Queen 2 minutes ago," I reminded her. Suddenly, the double doors of the operating room burst open. It wasn't the police, not yet. It was Dr. Silas Thorne, the chairman of the board. Behind him were 3 security guards, the real hospital security, not Vance's hired thugs. Thorne was a terrifying man in his 70s, a man who knew my father. He looked at Vance with disgust that could have peeled paint off the walls. "Get them out of here," Thorne growled to the security guards. "Vance, you're fired. Holloway, you're suspended pending investigation. And Mr. Rostova?" He looked at Mark. "The police are on their way up." 2 guards grabbed Vance, who was sputtering excuses. Another guard took Jessica by the arm. She was crying now, ugly, sobbing tears. But Mark didn't move. He stood by the operating table, staring at me. The guards moved toward him, but he held up a hand. "Don't touch me," he said. His voice was quiet, dangerously quiet. He looked at me. The fear in his eyes had been replaced by something else, something darker. It was the look of a man who realizes he has nothing left to lose. "You think you won, Elena?" "It's over, Mark." I felt a wave of exhaustion hit me. "The whole world knows." "The world knows I'm a scumbag," he agreed. A strange smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "But they don't know the rest." "What rest?" He reached into the pocket of his discarded trousers, which were draped over a stool. The guards tensed, hands on their batons, but he didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen once. "I knew you might do something like this," Mark said softly. "You're too smart to just walk into a trap." "So I set a trap within the trap." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, a fresh spike of anxiety piercing my chest. "The broadcast," Mark said, gesturing to the camera. "It distracted everyone. It distracted you. While you were busy getting your confession, and while the board was busy watching the screens, no one was watching the server room." My blood ran cold. The server room. That was where the patient data was stored. But more importantly, it was where the hospital's financial routing numbers were kept. I initiated a transfer 10 minutes ago, not for $50 million, for everything. The operating accounts, the endowment fund, the payroll reserves. It was a scheduled script. It needed a final authorization code. He held up his phone. The screen showed a progress bar. "Transfer complete." "I just sent it," he whispered, "to an offshore account in the Caymans that you can't touch. I may go to jail, Elena, but St. Jude's, this hospital." He laughed, and the sound was worse than his screams. "St. Jude's is bankrupt. You saved yourself, but you just let your father's legacy die." The monitors behind him started to beep, not medical alarms, but system alerts. On the computer screen attached to the anesthesia machine, a red box popped up. "Critical error. System failure. Financial database purged." Dr. Thorne's phone started ringing, then Vance's phone, which was on the floor, then mine. A chorus of ringing phones. Mark smiled at me one last time as the security guards tackled him to the ground. "Checkmate, darling." The words, "checkmate, darling," hung in the air like toxic smoke. Mark was laughing as the security guards dragged him backward. It wasn't the laugh of a sane man. It was the broken, jagged sound of someone who had decided to burn the world down just to see the sparks. Dr. Thorne, the chairman of the board, was clutching his chest, staring at his phone. "He's right," Thorne wheezed, his face draining of color. "The accounts, they're zeroing out. The endowment, the payroll, it's all gone. Hundreds of millions. Gone!" Panic, sharp and immediate, erupted in the operating room. The security guards looked around uncertainly, wondering if their next paycheck would bounce. Vance, who was still being held by a guard, started screaming. "I didn't know. I didn't know about the money. He went rogue. I want a deal. Jessica was sobbing on the floor, curled into a ball. And Mark? Mark just kept smiling at me. He was pinned against the wall now, handcuffs clicking around his wrists, but his eyes were locked on mine. He wanted to see me crumble. He wanted to see the Ice Queen melt into a puddle of despair. He wanted to know that even if he went to prison, he had destroyed my family's legacy. "You can't fix this, Elena," Mark taunted as they began to haul him toward the doors. "You're the best surgeon in the city, but you can't stitch a bank account back together. St. Jude's is dead, and I killed it." I stood perfectly still. My hands were resting in the pockets of the oversized, dusty lab coat I had stolen from the supply closet. I looked at the monitors flashing critical error. I looked at the terrified chairman. I looked at my husband. And then I did something none of them expected. I checked my watch. "Wait," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it had a peculiar quality to it. It was the voice I used when I made the first incision. Calm, absolute. The guards paused. Mark frowned, his smile faltering slightly. "Wait for what, Mark?" spat Mark. "For the bounce notification?" "No," I said, walking slowly toward the computer terminal where the transfer complete message was still glowing on the screen. "Wait for the reboot." "The reboot?" Thorne asked, confused. "Elena, what are you talking about? The money is gone." "Is it?" I asked. I turned to the wall camera, the one that was still broadcasting to the entire hospital. I looked directly into the lens. "Sarah," I said clearly, "cut the simulation." For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the screens flickered. The red critical error boxes vanished. The ominous transfer complete bar dissolved into static. The monitors went black for a heartbeat, and then the standard St. Jude's logo appeared, rotating gently in blue and white. A new window popped up on the main screen. It was the hospital's central banking dashboard. Current balance? $412 million. Status secure. The room went dead silent. You could have heard a suture needle drop. Mark's face went slack. The color didn't just drain from his face, it vanished, leaving him looking like a corpse. He stared at the screen, then down at his phone, then back at me. No, that's impossible. I have the confirmation code. I saw the transfer." "You saw what we wanted you to see, Mark," I said, my voice cool and smooth. I walked over to him until I was standing toe-to-toe. The guards held him back, but he was too shocked to lunge at me now. "You said you set a trap within a trap, but you forgot who you were dealing with. You forgot that I'm not just a wife, I'm a surgeon. And the first rule of surgery is never trust the patient's self-diagnosis." "I don't understand," he stammered, his arrogance crumbling into dust. "Sarah didn't just patch the camera feed to the lobby," I explained, savoring every syllable. "When I was in the closet, before I came out here, I texted her 2 instructions. The first was to broadcast the video. The second was to isolate OR3 from the external network." I gestured to the room around us. From the moment Sarah hacked the system, this room has been in a digital quarantine, a sandbox. You weren't connected to the global banking SWIFT system, Mark. You were connected to a local intranet simulation that Sarah whipped up in 5 minutes. You transferred the money to a ghost account on a closed loop. It never left the building. Mark looked as if he had been shot. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "You played a video game," I whispered, leaning in close so only he could hear the final twist of the knife. "And you lost." You bitch," he hissed, but there was no fire in it, only defeat. "Get him out of my hospital," I commanded the guards, "and take the trash with you." I gestured to Vance and Jessica. As they dragged Mark away, he didn't laugh, he didn't smile. He screamed.
It was a long, guttural sound of pure frustration, the sound of a narcissist whose reflection had finally been shattered. When the doors swung shut, the silence that followed was heavy. Dr. Thorne walked over to me. He looked shaken, aged by 10 years in 10 minutes. He looked at the screen where the funds were safe. Then he looked at me, with a mixture of awe and fear. "Elena, you saved us. You saved everything." I took a deep breath, finally letting my shoulders drop. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a dull ache in my bones. "I didn't do it alone, Silas. Give Sarah and IT a raise. A big one." "Done," he said immediately. "And Vance? Jessica?" "Gone," I said firmly. "I want their licenses revoked. I want the police reports filed today." "And Silas?" "Yes." "I want Vance's office cleared out by tomorrow morning." I smoothed the front of my stolen lab coat. "I'm going to need the space." 2 months later, the courtroom was packed. It always was for high-profile cases, especially when they involved prominent socialites and scandal. But I didn't care about the cameras or the reporters whispering in the back row. I sat in the witness stand, my back straight, my hands folded in my lap. I wore a tailored navy suit, sharp, professional, impenetrable. Mark sat at the defense table. He looked terrible. He had lost weight. His expensive haircut had grown out into a shaggy mess. He wouldn't look at me. He kept his eyes fixed on the table, picking at a loose thread on his orange jumpsuit. Vance and Jessica had already taken plea deals. They had turned on Mark instantly, painting him as the mastermind, the manipulator who had promised them riches and power. They were desperate rats fleeing a sinking ship. Vance got 5 years for corporate fraud. Jessica got 3, and her medical license was permanently stripped. She would never hold a scalpel again. But Mark had pleaded not guilty. His ego wouldn't let him admit defeat. He claimed entrapment. He claimed insanity. He claimed everything except the truth. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Ms. Chang, walked toward the stand. "Dr. Rostova, in your own words, can you describe the events of that Sunday?" I leaned into the microphone. "My husband, Mark Rostova, staged a medical emergency to lure me to the hospital. He intended to gaslight me into a public breakdown to seize control of my assets and the hospital board." "And when you discovered this," Ms. Chang asked, "how did you feel?" I paused. The courtroom went quiet. I looked at Mark. Finally, he looked up. His eyes were hollow, filled with a simmering hatred. "I didn't feel anything," I said honestly. "In surgery, you don't have the luxury of feelings. You identify the pathology and you cut it out." Mark flinched. "And is it true," the defense attorney tried to argue later, "that you humiliated him publicly, that you broadcast his private conversation to the entire hospital? Isn't that an act of malice?"
"It was an act of transparency," I countered, my voice icy. "Darkness is where infection grows. I simply turned on the lights." The jury didn't take long, less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts: conspiracy, attempted grand larceny, fraud, corporate espionage. When the judge read the sentence, 15 years in a federal penitentiary, Mark didn't scream this time. He just slumped forward, his head hitting the table with a dull thud. I didn't stay to watch him be handcuffed. I had work to do. 1 week after the verdict. The visitor's room at the state penitentiary was cold and smelled of industrial cleaner, a cheaper, nastier version of the hospital smell I loved. I sat on one side of the thick glass partition. Mark shuffled in on the other side. He looked older. The gray in his hair was visible now that he couldn't dye it. He sat down heavily, picking up the phone receiver. I picked up mine. "You came," he said. His voice was scratchy, unused. I had to sign the final divorce papers, I said, sliding the document toward the slot in the metal table. Your lawyer said you were refusing to sign unless I brought them personally. Mark ignored the papers. He pressed his hand against the glass. Why, Elena? Why didn't you just leave me? If you were unhappy, if you suspected me, why destroy me like this? I looked at him, really looked at him, for the last time. I remembered the men I thought I had married, the charm, the warmth. It had all been a mask, a performance designed to get him close to the Rostova fortune. I didn't destroy you, Mark, I said. You destroyed yourself. Greed is a cancer. It eats the host. I just hastened the prognosis. I loved you, he lied. In the beginning. No, I shook my head. You loved the idea of me. You loved the status, but you hated the woman who earned it. You hated that I was the sun, and you were just a planet in my orbit. He sneered, the old Mark flashing through for a second. And now? You're all alone in that big house? You have your hospital, you have your money, but you have no one. Who wins, Elena, really? I smiled. It was a genuine smile this time, not the cold one I used for the cameras. I wake up every morning in a house that I own. I go to a job where I save lives. I answer to no one. I don't have to look over my shoulder. I don't have to wonder if the person next to me is plotting my downfall. I stood up. Solitude isn't a punishment, Mark. It's a luxury, one you're going to have plenty of time to think about in that cell. I tapped the glass with my fingernail. Clink, clink, just like I had on the OR window. Smile, I whispered. Mark slammed the receiver against the wall, shouting curses that were muffled by the glass. He pounded his fist against the partition, his face contorted in impotent rage. I didn't look back. I walked out of the prison into the bright, blinding sunlight. My phone buzzed as I reached my car. It was a text from Sarah, who was now my head of hospital security and IT. Message: Board meeting starts in 20 minutes. Chief, the investors are ready to sign the new expansion deal. We're independent. We're safe. I got into my car, my beautiful, clean Mercedes, and checked my reflection in the mirror. I didn't see a victim. I didn't see a broken wife. I saw Dr. Elena Rostova, Chief of Surgery, Director of St. Jude's. I put the car in gear. The winter was over. It was finally spring. This is Elena, signing off. If you enjoyed the story of justice and revenge, please like the video and subscribe for more. And remember, never underestimate a woman who holds life and death in her hands.